If no more questions, we can begin with the portfolio attribution. So see, like whenever we are talking about the portfolio attribution analysis, so basically the alpha, the return that the portfolio manager generates, it's due to three effects. One is due to the asset allocation. Second one is the security selection. And third one is your interaction effect. Okay. So in three ways, he tries to generate the return, which is nothing but your asset allocation effect that we'll try to understand here, the allocation effect. We have your selection effect, and the third one is your interaction effect. Okay, so three things we need to understand: the allocation effect, the selection effect, and your interaction effect. Okay, so here, if we talk about the allocation effect, so what do we mean by the allocation effect? Now, if we talk about this allocation effect, it certainly talks about the asset allocation. If I come to you and I give you my money as a portfolio manager, you have to decide that how much has to be allocated towards equity, how much has to go towards fixed income, or how much has the portfolio manager has to keep in cash. So here the bifurcation is between the asset classes. How much money has to go towards the different asset classes on the basis of my target beta or on the basis of my risk appetite, right? How much risk I can take in the market. And on the basis of that, the portfolio manager might design a specific portfolio, which might be an aggressive portfolio, which might have 100% equity and 0% fixed income. It might be a growth portfolio, which might have 75% to 80% equity and the remaining 25 to 20% debt. It might be a stable portfolio, which might have a 60-40 ratio, 60 equity, 40 debt. It might be a balanced portfolio, which might have 50% equity, 50% debt. It might be, I would say, a kind of a conservative portfolio, right? We are trying to maintain what? We're trying to maintain a kind of a higher fixed income allocation and a lower allocation towards equity. So might be the vice versa of 20-80. That's a 20% fixed income and 80% might be towards your equity asset class. So five classes we try to talk about. It can be an aggressive portfolio, a growth portfolio in the upper end, a conservative portfolio, or maybe a stable portfolio in the lower end, right? A 60-40 in terms of debt equity, or a balanced portfolio, correct? So the asset class allocation is toward that purpose only, trying to decide the correct asset class. And then you have the security selection. So once you have chosen that asset class, like for example, you chose 80% equity. So when you chose 80% equity, you have to decide how much or like which stocks to purchase in equity. Purchase HDFC Bank or ICICI Bank. Purchase HUL or Nestle. Purchase Tata Steel or Hindalco. Right? So these kinds of financial modeling and valuation skills you have to implement to select that security, to assign that fundamentals, right? And there's a huge process, and this curriculum is all about that only, right? How to do the fundamental analysis, financial modeling, and valuation for a particular company. We show that this stock has to be included in that portfolio, right? And after that, you have the interaction effect, which is the cumulative effect of the asset allocation, the security selection. Ideally, in most of the scenarios, people tend to say that the summation of the asset allocation and security selection is your interaction effect. But in real life, it might not happen. There might be some other strategic decisions which the portfolio manager has taken, right? So ideally, in the real life, we can say is the sum of the asset allocation plus security selection plus some kind of strategic decisions which the management has taken is your interaction effect. So that X component is always there. That asset allocation plus security selection plus X is your interaction effect. That X we need to understand ideally that how the portfolio manager is implementing those strategies and returns. Correct? So here is a question that is given to you, and we can just calculate or we can compute like these terminologies of the asset allocation and security selection and your interaction effect in the real life as well. So one question is there, the asset class is mentioned here: stocks, bonds, cash equivalents, the benchmark weight, the return on the benchmark can be Nifty or Sensex. If we talk about the India per se, it can be a different benchmark for different asset classes also. Because one thing you need to understand, the benchmark is not always Nifty 50 or Sensex. It can also be the Nifty 250. It can be the small cap index also on the basis of the kind of the asset allocation and security selection the portfolio manager has done. Because if you talk about a small cap fund, the small cap fund it won't be having the benchmark as Nifty 50 because Nifty 50 has the top 50 large cap companies, right? In that case, it might have the Nifty small cap or the BSE 250 small cap as the index, correct? Here you have the portfolio like here you guys have two persons, Jindal and Nazir. The portfolio weight of Jindal and the return given by the Jindal's portfolio. So 70% to stocks and the return by stocks is 15%, 20% to bonds, the return by bonds is 9%, and cash equivalents 10%, and 5% is the return on cash. Same for Nazir. So now it says to calculate the asset allocation, right? The security selection. So it says compute the value added by the portfolio managers, Jindal and Nazir. So it is saying you to calculate your interaction effect, right? On account of the asset allocation and security selection, what is your interaction effect? The total value added by the portfolio managers. So your simple maths you have to do. First is the calculation for the asset allocation. It's very simple. Just remember. So here you have to take what? See, first of all, like what you can do, you can calculate the return from the benchmark. So this we have so this we know how to calculate the return on the benchmark. The weight of stocks in the benchmark into the return of stocks, plus the weight of bonds in the benchmark, plus the return into the return on bonds, the weight of cash and cash equivalents in the benchmark plus the return on into the return on cash. So 60 into 0.18 plus 25 into 0.02 plus 0.15 into 0.07, it gives you the return from the benchmark. Similarly, we can calculate the return generated by Jindal and the return generated by Nazir. Similarly, same logic, 0.7 into 15, 0.20 into 0.09, 0.10 into 0.05. So one example I'll just teach you and the next I'll be giving you as homework. Okay? So portfolio management by Nazir. So iska bhi humne return निकाल लिया. So benchmark का return is 14.85. Jindal का return is how much? 12.85. So Jindal has underperformed the benchmark. The benchmark has given more return as compared to Jindal. It means going towards a passive investment strategy was far better than choosing Jindal as your portfolio manager. And same happened with Nazir. Nazir gave you like 13.6%, but still like 14.85% is far more as compared to the portfolio manager's return. So here again, Nazir underperformed. So in this way, we can get to know about the underperformance and the overperformance or the outperformance of the portfolio over the benchmark. Now here you have this allocation effect. How to calculate this allocation effect is nothing but the deviation in the portfolio weight minus the benchmark weight. So stocks ka, if we talk about Jindal only, portfolio, जो Jindal का portfolio है, the weight of stocks is 0.7. But in benchmark, the weight of stocks is 0.6. In Jindal's portfolio, the weight of bonds is 0.2. But the weight in the benchmark is 0.25. Right, is minus 0.25 ideally, right? Because like when you subtract these two numbers, you get a negative number. So no need to make this 0.05 positive. Sometimes what happen? What do people tend to do? Here you are getting as a negative number because you tend to take the difference of the portfolio weight and the benchmark weight. So 0.2 minus 0.25 is giving you a negative 0.05. Do not make it positive. Keep it negative only. Right? It means you are underweight. That is, you are underweight in the benchmark. It might happen, right? See, allocation and the portfolio weight, correct? You are underweight in the benchmark and you might be overweight in the portfolio. In this case, in stocks, you are overweight in the portfolio, right? So these scenarios can also happen. But in this case, you are underweight in the portfolio and overweight in the benchmark, right? So difference here. And here you have the second column, the deviation in the asset return the benchmark has given and the average return of the benchmark. Benchmark ka return kitna tha? It is 14.85, correct? And the return of stocks, bonds and cash equivalents we have taken. The return of stocks, 15. The return 18. You have this 12 and you have this 7. So the return in the benchmark minus the average return of the benchmark. The return of the benchmark given, right? Like is your 18% for stocks, 12% for bonds, and 7% for cash and cash equivalents. Subtract this 14.85. That's your total return from the benchmark. You subtracted that and just multiply these two columns. The first column is the difference in the weights of the portfolio and the benchmark to get to know about the over allocation or the under allocation in terms of weight into the benchmark return minus the average return of the benchmark. Second column and the third one, just multiply these and add all these three numbers. You get the asset allocation effect. Okay, so this is the effect due to the asset allocation. If we talk about security selection, you have to take the actual weights of the portfolio. No difference here. Actual weights of the portfolio. Here, we are not taking the difference between what? The portfolio and the benchmark. Okay, but one thing that is wrong here, we have to take the benchmark weights instead of the portfolio weights. See, the benchmark weight, this is some typo error. The benchmark weight is 0.6, 0.25, and 0.15. 0.6. So here you will have 0.6, 0.25, and 0.15. So here take the actual weights in your benchmark. Benchmark a policy weight kitna hai. It's also called as a policy weight in real world. It's also called as your SAA, that is your strategic asset allocation. This policy weight is nothing but your strategic asset allocation, SAA, right? Deviation in returns in the portfolio and the benchmark. Simply, जो portfolio का जो return है, उसको benchmark के return में से subtract 15 minus 18, 9 minus 12, 5 minus 7. That's it. So subtracting the portfolio return, so subtracting the benchmark return from the portfolio return, and then taking the multiplication of this, and here you get the total selection effect, right? So what they have done at the end, the formula for the exit return is nothing but the allocation effect plus the selection effect gives you minus 2.05, right? And same for Nazir. So one thing we need to understand that whenever we are doing this asset allocation, the formula for the asset allocation is nothing but you have the weight of the benchmark, right? Minus the weight of the portfolio. See, I'll just show you once again. See this allocation effect. Portfolio weight, you have this portfolio weight as 0.7. So here you were overweight in equities and underweight in benchmark. Overweight, you are underweight in equity and overweight in benchmark. So the difference is nothing but portfolio weight minus benchmark weight in the first column. Second one, you have the return from the different asset classes of the benchmark minus the total return from the benchmark, second column. Multiply the first and second columns and add all the three values for all the asset classes. You get the asset allocation effect. If we talk about this, if we talk about the selection effect, take the benchmark weight in the first column, and second one, the portfolio return minus the benchmark return, just to know the outperformance of the portfolio. In this case, it has been underperformance in case of Jindal. Multiply the column A and B and add the numbers, you get the selection effect. So sum of the asset allocation plus selection effect, it gives you interaction effect, ideally in this question. But there can also be a third component, X. It can be due to on the basis of the manager extra performance, or the manager has taken up some extra strategy, some tactical bets the manager has taken, right? The manager might have taken some more tactical bets. And what do I mean by tactical bets? The manager might have timed the market, because these policy weights that you see in here, these are the policy weights or a strategic asset allocation, which is buy and hold strategy, a kind of long-term strategy where you do not buy or sell frequently. But when you talk about a tactical strategy, that buying and selling is there, but the extent of buying and selling might be less, but still that buying and selling is there because we're trying to time the market. On the basis of that market news or the market commitments or macros, we're trying to buy and sell a particular stock to make that extra alpha, to make that extra return. So that X component can always be there either due to tactical bets or due to dynamic bets. So what do I mean by dynamic bets? Which I've already talked about, about in my previous sessions. We talk about the strategic asset allocation, the tactical asset allocation, and your dynamic asset allocation. Strategical asset allocation is nothing but your policy weights or the benchmark weights, how much you are allocating on a buy and hold basis on a long-term basis. Then you have the tactical asset allocation where try to time the markets and do buying and selling on the basis of the market news. But the extent of buying and selling is still less to avoid the volatility or to keep the portfolio turnover ratio in a systematic number. And third one you have as a dynamic asset allocation, which involves aggressive buying and selling. ideally used in futures and options for hedging purpose, right? But here, this X component can be due to tactical asset allocation, which is a number which is specifically calculated by the PMs if they have taken certain bets, right? And there can be one more last component, that is your impact of strategic. If I just tell you impact of strategic. So what is the impact of strategic? It is nothing but, for example, if I run a portfolio fund, if I run a mutual fund and my benchmark is Sensex 30, okay? So my benchmark is Sensex 30. I can also have an alternative benchmark. Sometimes the PMs also keep an alternative benchmark, BM2, which can be Nifty 50. And what is the reason to keep an alternative benchmark? It can be to understand the deviation in returns of both the benchmarks, how both the benchmarks are performing. If Sensex 30 has outperformed Nifty, why? If Nifty 50 has outperformed Sensex, then why? Right? What is the allocation of stocks? Because Nifty 50 has top 50 stocks, and then reject continuously takes place. The good stocks get added and the bad stocks get removed. And the same happens in Sensex 30. So on the basis of all these analysis, like which stocks are good in Sensex 30 or like which stocks are good in Nifty 50, you can alternate the benchmark or change the benchmark, right? And both the benchmarks might have different returns, right? He can over allocate or under allocate or change the stocks in his actual portfolio depending upon the reject that happens in Sensex or Nifty, or depending upon the specific stocks return in Sensex or Nifty. So always in your like investment banking industry, they ideally primarily have an alternative benchmark. Though in 90% of the cases, they use the benchmark one, but sometimes they also try to analyze the benchmark two. So just assume if Sensex 30 gave you 10% return and Nifty 50 gave you 9% return. So 10 minus 9, 1%. B1 minus B2. The benchmark one return minus the benchmark two return is the impact of strategic. Impact of strategic. So here it is not connected with the portfolio calculation. It is just the difference between the benchmark one and the benchmark two ka difference, impact of strategic. 1%. So 1% is your impact of strategic. That is, again, taking into effect all those strategies, like which are taken by all those managers in framing those Sensex 30 and Nifty 50. Impact of strategic is not talked about so much, but sometimes if someone asks you that what do you mean by your impact of strategic, it is just the difference between the two benchmarks. But the return of the portfolio will only be because of the asset allocation, security selection, and that extra X part, which is on the basis of the strategy the manager has taken, or due to some tactical or dynamic bets. And the last concept was impact of strategic, the difference between the return of benchmark one and the return of the benchmark two. And this model that we studied, the portfolio attribution model, this model is also called your Brinson's model, a very popular model in CFA level 3, Brinson's model. Okay, so that is something you need to understand. Okay, any questions till now? In the Brinson's model, any questions?